Hello, I'm back, and I'm gonna do another Deltarune video today. I uploaded my first ever video on this channel a few days ago, and I've been wondering ever since what I want my next video to be. And I think I want to lean into what I can bring to the table as a content creator in this community. And the first thing I thought of is what I do outside of this community. And for those who don't know, which considering I'm just starting out is pretty much everyone, I am currently a therapist in training. I'm not licensed yet, but I'm working on getting my master's degree, and I'm going to be a therapist in the very near future. And so what I wanted to talk about is something that came up in chapter 4 and why it is so critically important for a character that really doesn't speak, and that's Chris. Now, Chris in Deltarune is a very interesting character. They seem to be gender non-conforming. There have been some videos of where Toby corrects people who use he/him pronouns for Chris. So Chris is non-binary. They appear to be adopted just based on the fact that their parents are Toriel and Asgore, and they are going through a pretty rough patch in Deltarune, it seems. So currently in Deltarune, we have a lot of questions about what Chris's intentions are, who they are, and what their end goal is. But during chapters 3 and 4, we got a little bit more insight into Chris's past and what Chris may have gone through growing up. Now, namely, this comes through a scene, I believe it's chapter 4, where, and I only say I believe is because I actually haven't completed the eggs. I haven't gotten the eggs in chapters 3 and 4 yet. I did the night fight and the fight against Gerson in both chapters 3 and 4, but I have not gone back and replayed the chapters to get the eggs, which I will get to at some point in the next year before chapter 5 comes out. But there is a scene where the room where you get the egg is a reconstruction of the hospital in Hometown, and the receptionist, who is a colored-in Pippins, I believe, talks about how this is basically where you come and do art and you don't kill each other. And numerous people have already talked about how, it's clearly, Chris went to therapy because they have violent tendencies and they had something traumatic happen. Yes, I absolutely agree with that. But I want to go a little deeper today and have just an informal discussion about why this matters to the story and what are some possible directions that this could take, just based off my own education of art therapy as a therapeutic intervention used in counseling spaces. So just looking at Chris on, as if I was reading a file of a little overview of Chris. Chris has an older brother who's not in the picture. Chris has, and not in the picture, we don't know where Azrael is. It's believed that he's off at college, but right now he's not in Chris's immediate circle, not in his microsystem at the moment. But that is subject to change at any moment. And Chris has friends in Susie and Noelle. Noelle being a childhood friend, it's presumed that Des was also close to Chris, and Des is missing. And many people have pointed out that whatever happened in Chris's past that was potentially traumatic likely is tied to Des in some way. And I would like to agree with that, but I think focusing on Chris is more important in the here and now because Chris is the character that we, I would say play as, but honestly it's more of a play with, if theories regarding the soul are true. And I want to take a look at how Chris acts. Oftentimes in a video game, you'll have a silent protagonist, but dialogue implies that they're having conversations with other characters in game, even if we're not seeing that dialogue happen. And in the case of Chris, it's pretty interesting because their silence seems to be voluntary. Chris will step in and speak whenever we choose a dialogue option that they don't like, such as one with Rousey, where Rousey's kind of crashing out about the fact that he doesn't matter. And we're basically, Rousey's like running it by Chris to see if it's okay to act like that. And one of the options is, of course not. And if you pick it, Chris will cover their mouth and say, of course, and then, muffle the not. So Chris speaks. And that was my first question, was if Chris is entirely nonverbal, which is just, proven false through gameplay. Because if Chris was a nonverbal adolescent, then art therapy would be great for communicating feelings through artwork. Because when you have an adolescent who is nonverbal in art therapy, you can learn a lot about how their family operates, what their experience is, through colors and shapes and depictions of loved ones. And that's true for everything from sand tray to play therapy. But in the case of Chris, it seems like art therapy was chosen due to how calming it might be. It is inherently something that can be used for relaxation and giving someone the tools that they need to self-soothe and regulate, but also compartmentalize some troubling thoughts that they might be having. And I think that that's what it is for Chris. We see that Chris, they are someone who is very artistic. They are very musically minded, and so art therapy is right up their alley. Now, you do also have music therapy, which could be a good intervention for Chris, but I don't think that we would be able to get the same level of symbolism that we have with the art therapy scene that I'm going to talk about next if we were doing music therapy with Chris. So, to talk about what actually occurs within the secret egg room in Chapter 4, we first need to take a look back at Chapter 1. We've been having this recurring theme of a man behind a tree. And I think that that's very interesting because he says more and more as each chapter goes on. And I've seen people point out that this could potentially represent repressed memories and trauma that Chris is slowly bringing to the surface. And I think that that's a really good possibility. And we're at the point where we are actually getting a physical depiction, even though we don't get to see it. It's described to us. We get a depiction of what Chris is painting. Now, in order to talk about what Chris painted, we're going to have to make some assumptions. So, from my point of view, what Chris drew on the easel, or wherever Chris is painting, it is a recreation of either the event that traumatized them or the emotion that they felt when the traumatic event occurred. And what we end up with is a blob, an amorphous blob of gray, if I remember correctly, just gray. And Chris gets the paint all over their hands, and there's a whole scene where when they try to wash it away, there's some text about how you can never truly wash it all away. And when I read that, I don't just read that Chris witnessed something. What I read is that Chris was an active participant in whatever occurred, whether they were the perpetrator of the traumatic event or they were the victim or one of the victims of the traumatic event, I think that, even though it's likely not a metaphor for someone's innocence being forcefully taken away, I think that usually that's what that metaphor is, used with, but that's not what it is in this case. I do think that it is a traumatic event that is unique to the Deltarune world, rather than like a real world crime. And I think that there's enough pieces here to kind of try and figure out what that thing may have been. So we need to look at the other two factors at play here in order to try and start to piece together what happened to Chris. So the two factors that I want to look at are the man. So there's always a man behind the tree. That is a recurring detail. And there's a tree. The tree is always present when the man is present. The man is always present when the tree is present. After the dialogue, the man disappears, but the tree remains. So, I guess there are instances where the tree is there, but the man is not. And then there's the egg. I don't know the significance of the egg yet. I don't have, an ability to, I'm just kind of speaking off the cuff here, but I guess the symbolism of an egg could be tied to how this is kind of an incubating thought, and that it will hatch one day, and that could represent Chris's traumatic memories coming out, being ready to come forth with that trauma and talk about it. But I don't think that the egg actually represents something about the event. Okay, so we have a tree, we have a man, and we have the gray smudge, which is being drawn behind the tree. Now, the color gray in Undertale and Deltarune alike has held really, significance. It's usually utilized to represent goners, that being Gaster followers, or I think goner is generally the term for someone who has fallen down and died. So the Gaster followers in Undertale are assumed to be people who died, who follow Gaster in some way. They're represented by gray color schemes. Gray also represents the color of the vessel that we make at the beginning of Deltarune that gets discarded. So gray has kind of repeatedly been this color of death, color of after death. And so what comes to mind is that something happened where someone died. And this is kind of when you start to have the questions of who died, who killed them, who saw it, and it's really kind of a difficult theory to put together because of how few details we have. Obviously, the assumption would be that I've seen some people come to is that Chris killed December, and the gray smudge represents December dying, and the paint on Chris's hands represents how, Chris can never truly move on from the fact that they did that or may have done that, because Chris still lives in hometown, Chris is still friends with Noelle, Chris still has strong ties to the mayor. And so I think if I was to piece together a complete story from the point of view of someone who has familiarity with therapy services and providing them, but also symbolism and what it might mean, I think the story goes a little bit like this. I think that Chris and December were friends or, partners in some way, shape, or form. Both of them seem to have a rebellious side. Both of them seem to have a sort of violent streak with, Des kind of kind of getting Chris back anytime they mess with Noelle. So I think Chris and Des were closer than we think at the moment. And I think that something happened to Des behind a tree. Now, could it be behind a tree or in a forest? I think that's kind of where the lost where the forest grows or whatever, that's tied to Des. I think that's where that comes in. Something happened to Des where the forest, where the trees grow, and Chris was there. And Chris either blames themselves for it or saw it happen. And I think that December either died or came close to death or had something happen to them that was the equivalent of dying. Like, many people say that Des is trapped in the depths or in the bunker or is the night. Something happened to Des that ended the way she was living at that time and either changed it to something else or completely ended her life entirely, which is having her be represented by the color gray. I think that is a really good possibility. That's a really good foundation for what may have happened to Chris. And then from there, we have some variables that we need to kind of fit into this story somehow. So we have the man behind the tree, and he's very clearly not Gaster. As much as people want to kind of connect him to Gaster, he has a very different manner of speaking from the individual who writes the entries in Undertale, and the person who speaks through Toby on Twitter and at the beginning of Deltarune. It's very clear that the Eggman, and Gaster are different people. I think that if I had to interpret that, the Eggman is not Gaster, but I think that, and stick with me here, I think that it still could be Gaster. So I think the Eggman is not a real person. He's not a real individual. I think that the Eggman is how Chris remembers Gaster. I think that it's how Chris, interpreted Gaster. I think that Gaster may have been involved in whatever happened to Des at that time. And, however Chris remembers it now, it's not an exact memory because it's still repressed. It's still coming forward. And so we instead get this warped interpretation of who the man was. And that's how we end up with the Eggman. And I feel that way because after Chris gets the egg, every time, the man disappears as if he never existed. And I think that is very characteristic of Gaster, mostly because, think of the mystery man in Undertale, who everyone thinks is representative of Gaster. Like, you interact with him, he disappears. What happens with the Eggman in Deltarune, you interact with him, he disappears. And then, of course, the color gray comes in. That's tied to Gaster followers. I think that makes a pretty good case that the Eggman is not his own character, but a representation of Gaster. And that this is just how Chris is remembering them right now. And that could be, an incorrect interpretation, or maybe Gaster's different in this world. We don't know yet. We're still finding this out. This is all just, shot in the dark theorizing. And then another piece that we have to fit in is Asgore. So I think that potentially when all this happened to Chris, they needed to tell someone, because they're not mute, they're not nonverbal, they speak. And when they're uncomfortable, such as after the Spamton fight, it's very clear. There's outbursts, I believe when you're choosing the dialogue option, when Ralsei's asking if Chris is okay, or Susie, whoever asked it, Chris screams in response. There's anger, there's pain behind their voice. So they don't repress and hide their emotions, and if they do, there's always a breaking point where it comes out. And I think that Chris may have done that towards Asgore and told Asgore what happened. And however Asgore responded ended up getting him kicked off the police force. Whether he wrote it off as something that didn't happen, he tried to look for Des or tried to save Des and failed. I think that theory that Asgore failed to help Des in some way, shape, or form, and that got him kicked off the police force, is 100%. I completely agree with that. So, just to recap, I believe that Chris and Des were in a forest, maybe by the bunker, maybe just, behind some trees. Something happened. Either Chris did something or something happened to Des where they were mortally wounded. Their life as they knew it ended, and December became either the night or, she died, she became a goner. Something happened. It traumatized Chris, and Chris ended up attending therapy services for it. And along the way, maybe Asgore got kicked off the police force. And I trend towards believing that Chris may have done some sort of violent act. Maybe the soul made them do something, just because, washing the paint off your hands. This is where we do art and don't kill each other dialogue. Maybe that's a whole nother theory. If if they had to go to therapy, but it was because the soul made them. You know what? I might do a follow-up on this video. This theory is being made. Can you tell I don't script my videos? This theory is being made as I speak. So let's go back again. Maybe the soul made Chris do something to Des, and Chris feels guilty about it and responsible for it, and that is why Chris hates the soul so much, because the soul is now in the Snowgrave route trying to mess with Noelle, and you have Chris who's like, this is enough, trying to stop the soul from doing it, so trying to fight back. I think that's a real possibility. So I'll probably make a follow-up video to this that kind of synthesizes just where we ended up and maybe a more concrete version of this theory. Maybe I'll put a name to it. But that's, why this art therapy really seems to matter. Okay, sorry about that. I got a call. So I had to end the audio. But yeah, to those who watch it, let me know if you're interested in me making a follow-up video on this, or if there's another, theory or character that you want me to analyze, and that's, going out to whoever's watching this. I have a lot of experience in the field of counseling and therapy, and if there's another character, it doesn't even have to be in Deltarune, that, you guys want me to look at or analyze or just discuss, let me know, and I'm open to looking at it. So yeah, stick around maybe for a part 2. Let me know if a part 2 would be interesting. And I hope everyone has an amazing day. I'm out.